Does everybody have a copy of the book of Isaiah? Anybody need one? No. And I picked the New King James Version just for something different. And some people have remarked already that they like it because the print's big, and for us old people, that's great. I like that too about it. But a lot of the text I will use up here, sometimes there'll be different ones, but mostly ESV. And so, of course, as you can see, Isaiah is a book. Oh, you need a, Clint, you need a book? Thanks. There you go. Chrissy, you need a book? Heath and Macy, you guys need a book? You got one? Need another one? Man, you guys are on top. All right. Okay, so for the next 6 months, we're going to try to study on Wednesday night the book of Isaiah. And after getting into it, there's so much in the book of Isaiah that we will just be able to touch on things. Like this quarter, we'll have to go, it's 33 chapters, and it'll be roughly 3 chapters a class, and so I'm going to have to be selective of what I pick out, and I'm terrible at that. I have a schedule written down, but I haven't posted it because I know how I am. I'm going to see how the first couple classes go, and then I'll release that if it works the way I hope it will in this. Now, if somebody were to come up to you on the street and say, "What is the message of Isaiah?" What would you say? What's that, John?
Warning.
Warning, absolutely.
Hope.
Big warnings in there.
Hope.
Very good, Art. That is probably one of the biggest. If the main theme of Isaiah was to put, it'd be judgment. This will make clear as we go on. Judgment or hope through judgment. That's the main theme through Isaiah. What else would you might describe what you see in Isaiah? Danny?
I think maybe along with that, this judgment isn't the end, right?
The judgment at the end?
It's not the end.
Right.
Just go back to it.
Very good. That's an excellent point. One of the things, a phrase I liked, I heard it says, with God, the last word is never judgment. He's always, and as we will see, he's always looking for, to bring people back to, it's not the last word with him. That's not what he wants. But we live in a world of cause and effect. And so with what happened with sin and things like that, there's a cause and there has to be an effect. And he has to deal with life and earth with things in that way. But God, because of his grace and mercy, helps us in that if we'll listen. And we'll see how that works out in this book. Any other ideas about what you have seen the book of Isaiah is about? It's a great book. Jeff?
My mind always goes to Isaiah 53.
Yes. That's a focal point. It's almost like a big chiastic structure. It all goes to that, to the Messiah. It's what it's all about. That's where the answer to everything is. If you were to say, a lot of people would probably say Isaiah is a difficult book. And I would say, yes, it is. It is a difficult book, but there's a lot in there, like Mark Twain used to say, there's a lot in the Bible I don't understand. That doesn't bother me. It's what I do understand. It's what bothers me. And in this book, there's a lot of things in there that we'll understand and that will become very clear to us. And some people say this is probably one of the greatest books in the Bible. And with me, every book I study or teach, it always becomes my favorite book or the greatest book. But I think Isaiah is particularly good because it covers the whole theology of God more so than any other book in the Bible. From creation to the new heavens and the new earth. When we see Exodus scenes, you just see all kinds of pictures like that. And Isaiah is considered to be the most accomplished Hebrew writer in all the Bible. They say, I asked Jordan, were you able to learn, a couple of weeks ago I asked you about Hebrew. Did you have any time to learn Hebrew? Okay. If we could read in Hebrew, they say it's just beautiful. And I don't know what that means, but they say it's just beautifully written. It's mostly in poems, especially the first 39 chapters is written in poems. Some people say that Homer Haley calls him the dean of the prophets. And if you read all the commentaries, there's a lot of names for him. They call it the fifth gospel because you could, preach the gospel. Philip did preach the gospel to the eunuch there started from there anyway. And why would you think he's called the prince of the prophets? Any ideas about that? About what you know about Isaiah personally? Or Danny, what do you think?
Is it kind of a reference between Moses and Isaiah and that kind of way?
Yeah, there's one sense in which they think he might be related. This is not in the Bible. This is what Jewish writers wrote, that they think he might be of the royal family. They think his dad, Amos, was the brother of Amaziah, one of the previous kings. But that's just in Jewish writings. But a lot of people say that. That seems to be. But it's because of his access to the kings. He was there. He wrote in 2 Chronicles, it talks about where he wrote a biography or something. Hezekiah asked him to write a biography of his life, and he did that. So he seems to have close contact. We'll see he has contact with with Ahaz and with Hezekiah in this book. He has easy access. But other prophets did too. But Isaiah seems to be pretty well known in that. Let's see. The depth of his theology, like I said before, and theology, what I'm talking about there is this. Theology is the study of the nature of God and his religious belief. And one guy wrote, he said, we will see the terrifying holiness of God depicted as clearly as any book in the Old Testament, but we will also see the unchanging grace of God depicted as clearly as anywhere in the New Testament. And that's true. It's just an amazing book. One guy wrote, he said that he considered the Hebrew poetry the Mount Everest of Hebrew in it. And of course, we can't get into that. Now, to underscore the preeminence or the scope of the influence of this book, here's just a couple facts to see this does seem to be a pretty important book. In the New Testament, quotes from 30 of Isaiah's chapters, with indirectly quoting from 38 total of his 66 chapters. And it says that in 90% of the New Testament, 90% of the New Testament's 260 chapters, Isaiah is in 90% of those. His quotes are found. He's referred to in the New Testament some 85 times, or it probably depends on your version. I've seen various numbers, 85, 90. The direct quotes, I think, are somewhere around 60 some odd. And I've got some sheets. I think about making up a little book about a lot of the facts like this, where all his quotes are, because that's kind of interesting, to see all the times that he has written and he is cited. He's cited more, that name Isaiah is cited more than any other author in the New Testament. And he's quoted by name more often than all the other prophets combined. What Old Testament book is the most quoted in the New Testament? Psalms, yeah. Isaiah's second, I think Deuteronomy's third, years ago, somewhere in there. This idea here, if you ever were captured by pirates and marooned on a desert island, the book you might want to take is Isaiah, because like I said, it contains more about God that you would be very happy. I think the pirates might even let you do that. Let's see, what you see in this book are just so many pictures of creation, salvation, redemption, judgment, hope, this unimaginable power that we'll see of God. I mean, it's just, when you really think about this, some of the scenes in here, it's just, what an incredible God. But you'll also see one of the things, have you ever heard of the word chagrin? You know what the word chagrin means? I looked that word up, it's like distress, or over something. And that's what you see in God. He hates to see what his people do and what he has to do to them. It's not what he wants to do. And that really comes out in his thing. It's like the last word with God is not judgment, but he has to be true to his nature and his character. How would you think that the book or God's word overall is different than, say, the Quran or the Hindu writings or the Buddhist writings and things like that? Anybody ever studied those enough to know some of the differences? I haven't. I just read this fact about that. They say, like in the Quran and those other things, it's all statements, okay? But in the Bible, what differentiates it It is a God that he's in space and time. He is with people. He has relationships with people. It's a phenomenal. This a profound difference, and I don't know why others that believe in that stuff don't see that. See, let's move on here. Where, Danny, did I have that? Yeah. Let's go to the next slide here. Okay. What I want to do is just try to lay out a picture. What really help me, and I think will help you to understand Isaiah, is how it's laid out. And once you see the overall picture, it makes a lot of sense. It's really profoundly laid out in a way that is very helpful. There, let's see. So in chapters 1 to 39, we have Isaiah's lifetime, and that's when that was all written in his lifetime. But what's interesting then is in chapters 40 to 55, that appears to be talking about the period of Babylonian exile, okay? And then you come to 56 to 66, that's a period of the return. So it's kind of interesting. He's writing to people 100 and 40 on, 150 years in advance. Let's see. So this book was written somewhere between 740 and 690 BC, and we'll talk more about dates here in a while. But there are definitely three periods of history in here. Let's see. So what we'll talk about here in a minute is that brings up a picture. And Rodney and I talked about it a little bit. He's heard this thing of, well, a lot of authors or a lot of commentators, and there was a big debate in times past, it's not so much now, about there had to be several authors of Isaiah. And you'll see that if you ever read any commentaries and stuff, that like, how could he write two people 150 years in advance? And that, by the way, Isaiah is the only book that writes like that. All the other prophets, they write about people, but Isaiah writes to people. And by extension, is not only, and it's what's profound about it, not only is he writing to them, he's writing to us. We can just put ourselves in each one of these segments of it, when he talks about this. One quick question here is, has anybody here ever heard how the book of Isaiah is laid out like the whole Bible? Has anybody ever not heard how that works? Somebody explain how the book of Isaiah is laid out like the Bible. Rodney, you've heard that?
Is it like the first 39 chapters?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's judgment and hope is intermixed in there.
Yes.
Judgment and then the last 27 are, the Christ, the Messiah, the hope through him.
Yeah.
More emphasized.
Now, whether God did that, I don't know, it's profound. Or the people that divided up the Bible, I get God didn't put the chapters in there, but anyway, that was done. I said it's done by some monk or something, writing in some characters. I don't know, some kind of weird story how that came up. And you'll see that, like he must have hit a bump on some of the chapters because the breaks don't make sense. But it's like the first three is judgment. There's a lot of judgment. There is hope, as Rodney says, but a lot of judgment going on. The Old Testament, it's a lot of judgment. Okay, 27. What is it? What does 40 start out with? Anybody know what was one of the first verses in chapter 40?
Comfort.
Comfort my people. Yeah, and then it goes on to say a voice crying in the wilderness, the beginning of the New Testament. So it's kind of profound in that way how that is laid out. What is known about Isaiah? So I'm going to ask you, what do you know about Isaiah? He's a prophet. Was he married? He had a wife. We'll learn that in chapter 7. I think she was called a prophetess. And whether that meant because she was actually a prophetess or because she was the wife of a prophet, don't know, because we don't see any prophecies about her. Daniel?
We just got done with Hebrews in the middle school class, and they mentioned in Hebrews that there was a prophet that was Solomon too. He's traditionally the prophet that's known as being Solomon too.
Yeah. There seems to be a lot of agreement on that. That is another of those things that, as in Jewish literature, that Manasseh didn't like him. And Manasseh isn't one that they said they put him in read one place where they put him in a cedar tree and cut it in half or something. It didn't sound very fun. But he did have a wife. He had two kids that we'll see that we know of, two boys that will come into play in pictures, and their names are prophetic meanings and stuff, and we'll see that in 7 and 8. we only see him appear a couple times in the book, in chapter 7 before Ahaz, and then in chapter 36 to Hezekiah. The only times, and then the first you hear his name, and then I think a couple other chapters might mention his name. But why would you think that Isaiah is not much talked about, or not much is known? We know a lot more about Jeremiah and Ezekiel, but why is Isaiah? Why would you think that not much would be said about him in the book, not much personally? I think there's a good reason. Once you read the book, you'll kind of see why that is the character that comes out in him. Or by his writing. You got an idea, Rodney, you're thinking about, or? Yeah?
I've been trying to read through all this, before you get too far into it. But I don't know. I'm sure not the right answer, but it's not about him. He's presenting God and his judgment and his hope in God. Everything's about the holy God, not Isaiah.
Absolutely. I think not about him, it's about God. He's really magnificent in that way, as we'll see, how dedicated. Isaiah is the picture of what God is looking for in us, as we'll see. We'll get into that more. The only other thing personally about him that happens is in chapter 20, where he wants to, it's an embarrassing thing, really. For 3 years, God asked him to walk around naked. Now, what that meant, and it could just be he didn't wear his outer garment, something like that. We don't know, but there was conspicuous what he did because it was symbolizing something that was going to happen to them, and so he had Isaiah do that for 3 years. But other than that, there's not a whole lot that we know about him. This next thing here, this one commentary, I have several commentaries on it, and there is one that I've really got a lot out of. I think this guy really gets Isaiah, and this guy does a really good job too. A lot of these guys, they're premillennialists, and that's the only thing that discourages me when I read. They can be so keen on certain things and pick out this profound truths and stuff, but then they talk about the millennial reign that's talked about in here, and so. But the one guy I like the best doesn't do that, and to give you an idea of how complex the book is, he said that when he was asked to write the book, a very famous R.K. Harrison. Have you ever heard of him, Rodney? He's a famous commentator. And did things, but he called this John Oswalt is who I've done a lot. He called him and said, "Would you be willing to write a commentary on Isaiah?" And he said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And he says, "How long do you think it'll take you?" And he says, "I don't know." And he ended up, it'll take years. It took him 9 years to write the first 39 chapters. And the guy, the R.K. Harrison, he finally got it done. He had given him a deadline of 6 or 7 years or something, but it took him 9 years. And he said that was daily working on it. And he said the next 27 chapters, it took him another 5 or 6 years, I can't remember, to do it. But that just gives you, and to grasp there's just no bottom to this book. And so you're here with me a bit, trying to tell you, I'm an inch deep, and the book is a mile, It's just an amazing book. But at any rate, Jordan, would you mind reading this about Isaiah?
The meager biographical details we have indicate how completely Isaiah's mission dominated and consumed him. Jerusalem, which featured so much in his preaching, was his home city. His ready access to the suggests that he was highborn and moved in the most elite circle, yet there was nothing fed or fawning about him. His presence was a constant reminder that royal power was no absolute privilege and filled with heavy responsibility. His tense confrontation with Ahaz in chapter 7, for example, speaks volumes of his courage and unswerving commitment to his high calling qualities that were eventually to cost him his life.
All right. Anybody know what, there's some words in there I saw. Does anybody know where were those two words? Why would you even say that? Effet. Have you ever heard that word? There's what does it sound like to you? Kind of effeminate? Okay. Yeah, it's kind of like it's sort of pointing towards that. There's nothing effeminate about Isaiah in this book, or no, it's like overly refined. There's no, I mean, he's just direct. And by the way, I think Barry Kirchhoff said, if you want to hear how God would preach, Isaiah's the book. This is what it is. And that other book, Fawning, I hit the wrong button there. Fawning. There's a simple, I don't know why it's obsequious. That, a simple word, I don't know, put anything like that. Anybody know what fawning might mean? Obsequious is a synonym, but that means, anybody heard that? What, a person who is fawning, what do you think, Daniel?
Basically, practically tripping over themselves to please someone.
Yeah, very good. That's how it is. Isaiah was not like that, as we will see. All right. Okay, so one way to help us understand or get an idea was what I've already talked about is the time frame. And like I said, 1 to 39 is Isaiah's lifetime. Chapters 40 to 55 is the period of Babylonian exile. Let's see, did I have anything in there important? We'll talk a little bit about this here in a second. And then 56 to 66 is the period of the return. Now, if you were to be asked, well, how did Isaiah, this seems like it makes more sense that there's another writer, 40 to 55, that wrote about that period. During the return, like Ezra or somebody like that wrote those books. But the one thing about in the book, it doesn't mention any other writers. At the beginning, it says Isaiah. What would be one way for me, the most surest way to know that Isaiah was the author of this book? What might you offer, Art?
Those verses reference him, and they say Isaiah said.
Yeah, they reference him in it. That's like Paul in Romans 10. I don't have that up here, but Paul in Romans 10 quotes 53 and 65, and that's in that period. Let's see. And this book here, Jim, would you mind? Jason. Transmission's not working good today. All right, thank you.
When Jesus had said these things, he departed himself from them. Though he had done so many signs before them, they still did not believe in him. So that the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Lord, who has believed what he heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore they could not believe. Again, Isaiah said, he has blinded their eyes, and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I will heal them. Isaiah said these things because he saw the glory and spoke.
Anybody recognize where those are cited from?
53.
53 is one. Yes, very good, Art. And then chapter 6 is also from Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory in chapter 6. We'll see that's a great chapter in this book. But there are 2 points where Jesus, identifies in that. This other one, Rodney, would you mind reading that?
And he came, did you say big?
Yes.
And he came to Nazareth where he had been brought. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue and read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found a place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, and set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor."
This is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And anybody know where this is found? Yes, I wouldn't think so. What's that?
It's 61.
61, very good one. Yeah. Chapter 61 where that is. So that's in the period of the exile when that's written. So Isaiah saw these things. And so if God, God's the one that inspired him. Go ahead, Rodney.
And so that's the problem with these people, with these, Isaiah.
I know, yeah.
They refuse to believe in inspiration.
Yeah.
But Isaiah's writing about what will be, and he got it right, because God was inspiring him. And so what's the problem if he's a prophet that he could write about what would happen, 200 years later?
Yeah. It's a simple thing. Yeah, I forgot. But he just said, and one of the things about the difference in, like from 1 to 39, you see Isaiah in location and stuff. And then in 40 to 66, you see him talking to people. He does, there's no time markers. There's no, like where he was there. He was seeing these things in the future. Buddy?
At the beginning of the class, when you were asking about what we see in Isaiah, this is what came to my mind, and I was hoping that you would have this in here.
Oh, really?
Because in verse 20 or 21, it says, today, this is,
Scriptures.
the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. He
Wow.
revealed himself
Yeah.
through Isaiah.
Yeah. And the people, they must have fainted on the floor when he said this. That'd have been a neat scene to be there to see this. And this is also quoted in Matthew, and Jeremiah has this same scripture in there too. So it speaks about something like this. But the rest of the chapter, this is one of the more encouraging chapters in that 56 to 66, and Isaiah, I'll explain why. But yeah, the rest of the chapter goes through, and it's a celebration of those who come to Jesus and follow God, the great benefits that there are in following him. Let's see, the next thing here is, if we had a Jeopardy, our next category is contemporary prophets, okay? Anybody know when Micah might have been around? Him and Isaiah were nearly at the same time. Isaiah was 740 to 690, somewhere in there. Micah is right there. Does anybody know anything about Micah and what his deal was at that time? There's one verse in there in chapter 2 of Isaiah and chapter 4 of Isaiah. They're exactly the same thing. They must have compared notes or something. There's two scriptures thing, but their message is a lot the same too, judgment and hope. But Micah is considered more a rural prophet. Isaiah this is the best, they could have been both the same, but they thought Micah as being more the country prophet and Isaiah the city in there. But they had a very, very similar message. Micah warns about Assyria and the Babylonians and invasions, but very, very identical, or a lot of messages of hope and judgment in there too. The next one, Hosea, he was a little bit before 758. Well, no, he was right in there too. But anybody remember anything about Hosea? He actually lived in Israel, in the northern kingdom, up there. And so he prophesied, of course, to Israel, as you see up there. But does anybody remember what his message was? What about his wife?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to call it Goober, but
Gomer, yeah. She was the prostitute, and it was a metaphor or whatever of the Hosea attacked the northern kingdom because of their idolatry, and idolatry was compared to adultery, and so that was the picture that was painted there. And he attacked more their worship, how their rituals and things like that were so bad. And then you have Amos. And he's a little bit before there, 765 to 754. And he was during Jeroboam II. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but during this time was a very good time for northern Israel and southern Israel. And this, up until about 745, they had it great. They were prosperous. And there was wealth, and everybody had cars or whatever. You look at that like that, everybody was doing very well. And we'll talk about that because of Assyria, because of what Assyria's condition was at that time. But Amos, he was a southern prophet, but he also preached to Israel. But his message was more, because of all this affluency and things like that, his criticism was of the leaders and the social and intellectual decay of how they treated people and, took advantage of the poor. Danny, what did you say?
he was pretty harsh.
Yes. Yeah, Amos was
To get out of the country and those kind of stuff,
Yeah.
house invasion and all that kind of stuff.
he was a very stern prophet. But as in Micah and Hosea and Amos, it's always with these, God's ultimate purpose is not to destroy. And that's the great thing that we'll see about it, but to save and to redeem, and that's the great thing that we see about God and all these things. Let's see, what slide am I on now? Let's see, that one, got that one. All right, we're talking about 729. Okay, now this is what I think will help us. We know the time periods, okay, that Isaiah is addressing. Now this outline here is what helped me the most to kind of, even though stuff is difficult, once you get the framework in your mind, it really helps you in reading it, and it makes you see how smart God is and things. In chapters 1 and 6, what we have for us is the problem of, do I have servanthood up there? I think that should be one word. The problem of servanthood and the solution. Okay, so chapters 1 to 5 are like an introduction to what is really going on there, and what we're gonna see in there is there's just a clash in there what was Israel's purpose? What did God want from them, and what does He want from us by extension? Yes, very good. That's God. You know, isn't that amazing that He does that? That is our responsibility. We are the link to the world for people to see God. And when they see us, you know, do they see God? And that's what He wanted that country or those people to bring the world and to show the world who He is. And there was a big clash. They did not do that. And so that's what we see, the problem of servanthood. It wasn't working. And what you'll see in there, and I'll show that in the next class, is there's what they call these interchanges. You see, this is judgment of the despicable things that they're doing. And then you'll see a verse of all this hope and of the kind of people that will be in His kingdom. And then you'll see the judgment, and then another one, like they call that this interchange. It's almost like he's right. He just doesn't want to be so negative. He wants to say, but there's an end to this story. There's something better coming in this. And then chapter 1 to 5 is a problem, and we'll see that in next class. What I want you to do is to read chapters 1 and 2, and we'll try to get through that. That's where it really, 1 through 5 actually lays all this stuff out, but 1 and 2, there's quite a bit in there. And then chapter 7 to 39, it's about trust. Okay, because 1 through 5 lays out the problem. Chapter 6 is the solution, and chapter 6 is if the idea is anybody know what the scene is in chapter 6? Yes, yeah. Isaiah has his vision before the throne. It's a great chapter. Okay, but yet what does he say? What is Isaiah's? He's undone. He says, I'm an unclean man in a country of unclean people. But then the cherubim or whatever it is goes and takes the burning coal. And it's interesting, he takes tongs, we'll talk about that, and touches his lips. One guy thinks he actually touched it because he had the tongs, he touched his lip, but I don't know. But that cleansed, Isaiah was cleansed in that. And so in Isaiah's attitude, as we will see, was like once he realized he was cleansed, what was his attitude? This famous verse, here am I, send me. Because after God cleanses him, you know, it's almost like God is casually talking, who could we send, you know, to go? And Isaiah says, here am I, send me. And so this is the solution. When Isaiah is a microcosm of what the nation of Israel is. When the people of Israel can have the same experience that Isaiah has, then God's purposes can be accomplished.
Was there any foreshadowing that He used a burning coal to cleanse them, the pain, that would indicate, which was what was going to cleanse Israel? That is, yeah, judgment, hope through judgment. Yes, He's got to refine them. Very good, yeah. Danny?
I was going to say, I know He talks about the judgment as refining fire.
Yes. Yeah. There is a picture like that in it. That's good. That's a good point. All right. So then 7 to 39. Okay. So you're cleansed, but what has to happen is all through the Bible, one of the biggest problems people have is trusting God. And so 7 to 39. We're going to have myriads of examples of why we can trust God. God, He's going to make very clear to us that yes, we can trust Him. Yes, we can lay our life down Him, and we'll go all through that. And there's some really great pictures in there of what it is to trust God and what not trusting God looks like. We'll see that very clearly. And what's my thought? Listen. Yes. And what it is because you can't serve a God that you can't trust. So God's going to prove that you can trust me. And to the point to where, like a lot of humans, how we are is we're wearing these royal robes, you know. And so once God shows that we can trust him, are we willing then to take off these robes and put on the servant's clothes and do that, buddy?
The zeal that Isaiah practically immediately has reminds me of the zeal that Paul immediately had.
Yeah.
And zeal is a theme throughout. Like Jesus had zeal. Like zeal for my church consumed him. When he cleared out the money changers and all of that zeal was.
That's a great point, buddy. That is, you know, if in the key to being a servant of God is having that same experience in the sense that Isaiah did. You know, once you see clearly your sinfulness before God and how that is, and then you see the grace that God has for you, that overwhelms you. And that is what, once you get that, that's what motivates you then. It's just you can't help it then, but share that and tell that. And you can't, because what a wonderful God. It's amazing, despite all the, because we're those people. We had that same problem, but yet God forgave us and stuff. But that's a great point. All right, and then 40 to 55, we have the grace, the means to servanthood. Now, 40 to 48, what we'll see is the exiles are coming home. They're being pardoned, okay? And it's like, they're like, what? We're coming home and stuff like that. But the problem that they had, one of the problems that they had is that they thought, well, we're God's people, you know, and we're sons of Abraham. And so, of course, we're coming home. And they had this idea, well, you know, we can just live, we're coming home now, we can live however we want. But that wasn't the case. That's not how it's going to be. And what we see, starting to see pictures, it talks about 40 to 48, it talks about pardoning and things like that. But we're introduced to the servant, how they're going to get, how this grace is going to come, so that, okay, they can trust God, he pardons their sin, but then the idea is, well, he forgave us, but we still have our guilt. And so how do we deal with that? And then 49 to 55, and especially 53, we see Jesus. Jesus, because of Jesus, is the way that will compel us. Then we trust him, but then Jesus, because of Jesus, now we can be cleansed. And I think it's a picture like we're judged, but Jesus was ultimately judged, okay? And so that we didn't have to be, and Jesus paid that price, you know? And so that's another picture in the Old Testament, especially in Ezekiel, you know, that God is going to cause us to be drawn to him. And that's what it is because that he was willing to do that for us, to lay his own life down so that we can be his children. And then that is what it's going to cause us then to want to serve him and be that servant. But so if the Bible if Isaiah just ended at 55, you could have the ideas like, well, Jesus paid for our sins, we're good to go. Not so fast. 56 to 66 then lays out what are the characteristics of these servants, you know, because they thought they could just live however they wanted. And in 56 to 66, there's a lot of condemnation in there for ways they were acting. God's servant does not act like this. When you are his servant, this is how you act. And we'll see some of those characteristics and laid out in 56 to 66. And finally, when we get into like the 65 and 66, it's just a lot of really, really encouraging things that he says. And I love the last verse. I didn't put it up there. But one of the last verses in chapter 66 is that this is the one upon whom I will look, at something like that. He who is humble and trembles at my word, who fears me and trembles at my word. Just a great, that's what it's all about. And that's what servanthood is all about, is that kind of servant that sees God, sees who they are, sees who God is, and is, I'm willing to serve and do whatever you want me to do. All right, let's see. I'm way behind in mine. We have 5 minutes. What time do we end? 7:50. Okay, we got 10 minutes in. All right. Let's catch up here. All right. So the next thing here is key themes in Isaiah, hope through judgment, as we talked about. That's what we're going to see. Because Isaiah had the message to them that you're going to be judged. And like, yeah, but he says, but there's hope beyond that. But God has to do this. Servanthood is probably the biggest thing. And the servanthood appears some 36 times in Isaiah, 30 times in 40 to 55. But really, it's the theme of the whole book, 6 times in the first one, because it's like servanthood. You read 1 to 39 through the eyes of servanthood, and then you'll see that 1 to 39 is kind of like, this is how not to be a servant, like that. And so the idea still is about servanthood through the book. Trust is a big theme in there. I think it's, trust mentioned 17 times, depends on which version it is or something, in the book. Rebellion is a word. They say that the Hebrew word for rebellion, pashah or something like that, is the most serious word for sin in there, and that's a sin that God hates. Anybody? How would you define rebellion? Your children have never rebelled against you. I'm sure you probably never have seen that. Flagrant, yeah. Yes. It's what God hates. It's like the definition I like says, I know where the limits are, and I'm going over them anyway. Nobody is going to limit me. That is the one thing that you get on the bad side of God, that kind of attitude. So again, the purpose, the intent for the people of Israel was to be that light to the nations, and that wasn't it. So the question in Isaiah is then, how can God, because he said he's going to, with these people, he's going to, show him, they're going to show the world who he is. So how can God take these sinful people and turn them into those people who are that light, who are those kind of people? And that's what the book is all about, is how does he do that? And of course, I just told you, through the grace and things like that God does. Okay, so we got a few more minutes here. Does anybody recognize this here? I didn't think I'd get to this point, but the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this has to do with, very good, Robert. Have you done this before? But how it relates to Isaiah is this, or does anybody know anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls? What is their impact upon the scriptures? Anybody ever heard Buddy's
Isaiah
wife?
is the longest and most complete one because it's written on metal. I can't remember, iron or copper.
Yeah, I have a picture of her. Actually, it's something about, there's some of the writings on a piece of copper that's something about a treasure or something like that. But most of them were on animal skins and things like that. But the story is, anybody relate the story? Rodney, go ahead. What do you think it was?
Well, my understanding is a shepherd boy, I forget what caused him to go in there. He was looking for something. Is that not?
I think something like lost goats or something.
Yeah, or something, and threw something and heard maybe something break, and it drew him into that area. And found these like jars, and when they opened them up, they found these scrolls.
Yeah, they said it took a few days. Stories, they go back and forth. They say it took a few days. They went back there. But yeah, that's what it is. You taught a towing cost to cast a rock into that, and they heard that. Then days later, they went with others in his tribe and found the tall clay jars in the cave. So these were the Essenes, I think they called him. But they were very much aware of what was going on. They were very, very religious people, and they made copies of the scriptures, and because they knew that they were afraid of the Romans, and they knew, and so they were preserving this, and it's wonderful that they did. And this wasn't until 1949 or something like that they found these. These have been in there for over 2,000 years that they found them, and these are a picture of some of how the jars are. They said many of the jars were empty. Some contained scrolls that were carefully wrapped in linen that had blackened over time. But these shepherds, they removed 7 of the scrolls and eventually handed 4 of them to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem named Kando, K-A-N-D-O. These are kind of a picture of what the scrolls might have looked like. I think I might have a number here, how many they found so far. It's amazing. 14 different caves or something they finally uncovered. And they're still finding things in them when they let them go in there and look. This man here, Kando, I think that's him here. This is a copy of the Isaiah scroll. And what they found in here, I think they found mostly Isaiah scrolls, copies, and they found one complete, okay, that was still intact. Amazing. And prior to that, prior to finding this, the most recent, does anybody know when the most recent, they call it the Masoretic text, when it was found, when it was written or whatever? AD, I think it's like 900 AD, somewhere in there. Something. That was the one that was the oldest that they'd have. This dates back hundreds, possibly 200-300 years before Christ came, that this might have been written. And so, at any rate, this guy, this priest here, he knew what he was looking at, but he couldn't read the text because they were written. Some were written in Aramaic, but this was written in Hebrew. So, but he knew what he had. But he bought these 4 scrolls for $100. You know what they go for now? They're just irreplaceable, yeah. But at any rate, and I read where it was some guy was reading in a what was it, some famous paper, but it was a little ad in there. And the guy that bought it for $100 sold it for $250. This guy in Israel, I think he was looking at it, and he saw that, and he had somebody buy it for him in the United States. It was in the United States. I think they had that. And he bought that, and then from then on, he knew what that was worth, and he got those. But here's I think this is might be an Isaiah one, but let's see. And they said, and that this Isaiah scroll was 24 feet long, and they said it was with only a few minor damages. And what they found, I think they said like 95% of the text matched that 9th century one. It matched, and the only other differences were like spellings or misspellings and things like that. So what it did is it just confirmed hundreds of years before Jesus. Here's Isaiah and all these prophecies and stuff that are in there about it. Just shook the world, you know, that kind of thing. That was an amazing find. And there's I think every book in the Bible or portions of it have been found in these caves, with the exception, I think, of Esther and Nehemiah. I think are the only ones that they haven't found of those things. But and this is what Emily was talking about, that copper thing. And if you could read that, we could go find that treasure. But I don't know if we could do that or not. And that's typical of what they might have found. A lot of it was damaged like that and stuff. So, and then here's a picture of this. That's looking at the Dead Sea. You know, where in that area, that was a pretty rough area in that area. Let's see. Let's see, it says here that in this one, the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls isn't over yet. Recently, archaeologists found a 12th cave in Qumran. I thought now they found 14, but that contained broken scroll jars. And according to CNN, the most reliable news network in the world, there are still hundreds more caves in the Dead Sea area left to explore. So that's an amazing thing. All right, so I think, wow, that worked out good. I didn't think I'd get through this. Let's see. One thing we'll talk a little bit about in the next class is some of the prominent empires. We'll just do a little bit of the background of what's going on. It's an interesting time in history, what's going on there and how God makes all these events come together and why Israel's where it's at, why Judah's where it's at. And a really cool guy that we'll be introduced to named Tiglath-Pileser comes into play to wreak havoc on all these people. But let's see. Yeah, we'll talk about that next class in there. But that's a picture that one guy will talk about a little bit less next time. Pretty good shot of him, pretty good side view there. That's his best side, I think. All right. All right, thank you for your attention. And next week then, 1 and 2 is what we're going to look at. And look at it through the light, that the problem of servanthood. And what do you see in there? What do you see the problem of servanthood? And make some applications, about what that means.